All right, awesome, awesome. So, Dr. Howard, thank you so much for that introduction. You're too kind, as always, but most importantly, for the warm welcome at Embry-Riddle this week from your entire team. So how fortuitous was it that we happened to meet recently at my first event as a director? So for the record, let it be known that you asked, and 7 days later, I was here. And I have to say that Washington, as you know, sometimes can be considered surrounded on all sides by reality. So listen, 3 weeks into my new role, I owe you a debt of gratitude on two things. The first thing is for getting me out of Washington for a little bit, and two, giving me the opportunity to meet some of the leading experts in the field of space traffic management. To our distinguished speakers here at the conference, thank you for inspiring us with your unmatched technical expertise, as well as your dedication towards remaining on the leading edge of a field that has rocketed to the forefront of our nation's priorities. It's a pleasure to be with you and join in on this incredible conference. So to our students who are here, both undergraduate, graduate, and beyond, I send my greatest thanks and my highest praise for you. Thank you for your commitment to a field that is so vital to our nation. You know, I was talking to members of the AST team yesterday at the Cape, and I was asking them about how flight termination systems had changed since I'd worked on them back in the 90s. And one of the team members replied, "I don't know, Dr. Chaudhary, I was in kindergarten then." Could have done without that. Regardless, you've chosen well to enter this field and this profession. The most exciting part of this is the reality that many of the careers you are participating in are in their infancy. If I were to use an aviation analogy, it's as if you've literally joined in on Jimmy Doolittle, Ira Eaker, and Pete Casada in the barnstorming days of aviation. A century ago, capabilities like aircraft mid-air refueling was an unknown and even considered an impossibility. But it eventually took its place among many other groundbreaking aviation innovations and ultimately changed the world. One after another, new discoveries meant new opportunities, and all new career fields were born. So on my way flying into Daytona, somewhere on final approach, I couldn't help but think that the men and women gathered in this room are squarely in the barnstorming days of space traffic management. Ladies and gentlemen, that's no dream. It is reality, and nobody knows it better than each of you. That thought fills me with energy, excitement, and anticipation of the days that await us. So it's only been a few weeks in my role at the FAA Office of Commercial Space, and yet I already feel like it's a bit of a homecoming to be around so many familiar faces and friends in the space community. Yet how could I feel anything but at home in this room, among my many fellow engineers, aerospace professionals, literally hundreds of careers represented in the space community. People known for taking some of the world's most complex problems and quite simply making it happen for our nation. So as you know, it's an extraordinary time in our nation, particularly in the commercial space industry. The National Space Council has convened and is in full motion. Our nation has launched more commercial aircraft in 2017 than any other country in the world. It has truly been a banner year for the industry. In this regard, I bring well wishes from the leadership of the FAA, Acting Administrator Dan Elwell, Associate Administrator Dr. George Neal, and the entire FAA AST team, an organization dedicated to ensuring that the future of this industry remains bright. So as you know, in addition to our regulatory responsibilities, it is our mission to encourage, facilitate, and promote the success of this industry in the public sector, private sector, and of course, our prolific academic research institutions, one that is inextricably linked to the global community. Part of my new role is going to be to look out onto the horizon for both challenges and opportunities from a holistic perspective, find the gaps, and accelerate progress for our nation. So now that's not a tough sell to convince people in this room that space traffic management is a priority. So how are things going on in Washington? Well, to that question, I want to give you an update, and as well, 2 brief observations that might help you gauge the importance of this conference, and for that matter, the value of the work each of you are doing every single day. So I'll start with a question. After the National Space Council met in October, what was the first issue that came down the pike? What was the imperative that our nation's leaders at the highest levels of government recommend we tackle first and foremost? In fact, the first interagency working group our nation chose to convene was focused on none other than space traffic management. That working group has already met twice and is addressing many of the issues that have been discussed so far in this conference. Folks, that means your work has accelerated to the head of the line at the highest levels of government. The second observation, and quite frankly the most encouraging aspect of late, is that we've seen elements of bipartisanship grow in this arena. For example, Representatives Brian Babin and Ami Bera, Republican from Texas and Democrat from California, respectively, the chair and ranking member of the House Science Subcommittee on Space, came together in December and authored an op-ed on our national strategy on space. Now, take what you will from this, but from my perspective, I believe it's an important and encouraging signal that our nation's leadership understands the stakes involved in this issue. In fact, I think it's worth it to stop and ponder the fact that this op-ed actually included the words, "We agree," in the title. So it appears that authentic and bipartisanship in dialogue on space is on the rise, and I'm optimistic that more is on the horizon. And as well it should, because America is a spacefaring nation among many global partners. And the members of FAA AST know, just as President Kennedy noted, that the exploration of space will go ahead, whether we join in it or not. And I'd further paraphrase him by emphasizing that if we plan to be a part of it, we had better plan to lead in it and do it collaboratively. Yet, in order to lead on this issue as a nation, we need to consider 2 fundamental realities, issues that I know aren't lost on this group. The first is that space traffic management has to be regarded as a complex ecology, and a fragile one at that, consisting of forces and austerity that no single government or private entity can singularly control. The second is that we have to engage in this reality collectively. If we are to better understand this ecology, both on a technological and a human level, if we are to be successful operating in it. So while there's no doubt that the individuals represented in this room are the very best in understanding the technical aspects, I'd like to take a few minutes and discuss the human aspects of this challenge, primarily through the lens of some of my own research experiences. You see, in the mid and late 1990s, NASA was working hard to develop a damage repair system that astronauts could react to orbital debris impacts on at the International Space Station. Like many of the researchers in this room, I had the good fortune of working in this environment as a NASA graduate student researcher at Marshall and Johnson Space Center, alongside some of the top engineers and even our nation's astronauts. The goal was to develop methods of damage assessment and repair that could be used in the event of a catastrophic collision. The system we developed was affectionately known as Kermit, the kit for external repair of module impacts. Don't ask me how they got there, I have no idea. Like any experimental research endeavor, it involved long hours, proof of concept, and of course, programmatic funding decisions involving different NASA centers. Despite a number of technical papers and a well-developed design, a manifest in the shuttle for a detailed test objective eluded the program. As many efforts do, the effort gave way to other important priorities and funding constraints, and for some reason, never got the go-ahead for deployment. So upon graduation from graduate school, I never received a call on the system or the papers published on it again. At least not until I heard the news that we had lost the Columbia shuttle due to high impact damage, and that our astronauts were not coming home. Worse yet, when it was acknowledged that the decision to bring the shuttle home was due to a gap in knowledge on damage assessment, my sadness turned to shock. It was at that point, that moment of grief and sadness, that I realized that the foundations of my technical background and the rational scientific processes that resulted in what I believed would yield sound judgment had not been enough. You see, that's the thing about the human side of research. As technologists, we get so engaged in the technical solutions that we underappreciate the human complexities involved and thus neglect to engage it. A fact that can often result in suboptimal decisions and sometimes result in catastrophic events. It was this fact that led me to Georgetown University, where I could study this phenomenon more closely and its impact on executive decision-making at senior levels. So this comes straight from the heart. We need to stay focused, not only on the science of our work, but also the values that produce our work. That means that when we take our research forward, that we should move with dispatch, but yet also know that we must retain the wherewithal to articulate what our research is for. What values are at stake, and the human lives that often hang in the balance. That is why we should not only engage in the language of science, but also inculcate a healthy dose of the humanities into this process. And when we do this, we'll be replicating the life works of figures like Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, as you can see an uncanny resemblance at the Sistine Chapel between neuroscience and Michelangelo's art. Don't forget Thomas Jefferson and, of course, Steve Jobs, all of whom thrived on this nexus in order to innovate. In fact, it was Einstein who, when fatigued by his mathematics, chose to play violin in order to energize his creative instincts. And that's what it is, folks, pure energy. To ensure that the fundamental principles of space traffic management translate into policies that engage, not truncate, the complex ecology of space traffic management. So that is harnessing the strength of commercial enterprises, leveraging open architectures, and providing products and services that affect the common good. So in the coming months, FAAST and our Center of Excellence looks forward to hearing your feedback on these and many more issues. The men and women in this room know better than anyone else that this is a whole of nation, whole of globe effort. Our community is filled with some of the smartest people on the planet, yet it will be our collective genius that will propel our nation and the global community towards responsible norms of behavior in the space traffic environment. It's my perspective that we can no longer afford to move at the speed of government when the entire world is moving at the speed of imagination. Let's not forget that in the course of leading, we can't go it alone. We've got to do it together. We must establish an openness that transcends self-interest and ensures our nation serves as the exemplar when establishing acceptable norms of behavior in the space traffic environment. So I'll close with a reflection on the recent Martin Luther King holiday. Because as we enter into this global arena of global competitiveness, we must be mindful of our quiet innovators, the hidden figures that for some reason had the doors of destiny closed on them. Just a few months ago, I had the pleasure of meeting one of the original hidden figures, Dr. Christine Darden. She's still a firecracker, boundless in her pursuit of truth, and still inspires generations of future space explorers, including my daughter. I often wonder, what would happen had the doors of destiny remained closed for her? To the leaders in this room, I'll ask you one final question. Whose door will you open? Ladies and gentlemen, we are at an inflection point in the history of commercial space. It's all hands on deck. If we are to be successful as a nation, all doors must be open to those that want to pass through it and contribute. Because the keys to innovation and technological advancement throughout history have been handed to those with the grit and determination like Christine Darden, my incredible colleagues at FAAST, and of course, the men and women in this room. I'll leave you with one final thought. We must always remember that the status quo needs only one thing to triumph, and that's for good people to stand on the sidelines. And we honor those who we've lost best, not only through the technical journey, but by carrying on their pioneering spirit. Once again, thank you, Diane, for this incredible opportunity to speak and listen and learn from each of you this week. Most importantly, thank you for the work you do every day on behalf of our nation. Let's get to work.
No questions? I have one. Can I hit you with a question?
Absolutely.
So I thank you very much for that really inspirational talk. I was brought to the brink of tears. However, now my mind is kicking back in. I wondered if you could identify for us here in this room some of the research needs that you see, and I'd like to capture them on the whiteboard, if I may. Thanks.
Okay, great. I think the first one is as I described it in point one, which is understanding the ecology, taking time, and we're seeing a lot of it here. So if I were to take my first month in the seat, I would say I've learned a lot, and I'm seeing a lot of things materialize that I wasn't aware of and will continue to learn about. So the more we understand this ecology and the complexities of it, the better we can establish governance that allows us to be effective, cooperative, and more successful in it. Okay? Anyone else? Go ahead. All right. Yeehaw, awesome.
Thank everyone at AST for the 8 years so far that we've been able to work as a government, industry, academia partnership. And the question that I have for you, sir, and I know you've only been on the job about a month or so now, is what role do you see as innovation interplays with academia and industry, where we can go and do new things and different things than what all the universities have been doing. So do you have anything that you would, in a wish list world, say, this would be awesome if we could get this done?
Yeah, and it goes right back to the story I was telling you. The research that we had worked on in the 90s, you plug in, and I was talking to a PhD who just won a DOT award, and his biggest concern is, what will happen to my research? What's going to happen? So I plug in, do this research, publish the paper, and then I'm on next endeavor and things. So I think the Center of Excellence provides a space in which there are enough connectors for the members of the Center of Excellence to recognize those opportunities and find ways to make them available to some reality that is going on in the field of inquiry. And I think that's where these Center of Excellences make their money. And I don't think there was back in the day, but now that there is, that's something that I want to make right in the future. And so those opportunities, when you have those suite of capabilities that emerge or knowledge that's produced, it allows you to take that and affect change in a much more rapid fashion. So that's what I believe the future will hold. I think the COE is doing that right now. It's amazing to watch, and we want to do more of it. Go ahead.
Victoria Sampson, Secure Well Foundation. You mentioned yourself about the need to engage in the STM ecology from a collective viewpoint. And one of the common themes that has emerged this week is the need to have international partnerships. I'm wondering how you recommend we can best go about moving ahead with that, considering how STM is in a state of flux.
Yeah, absolutely. Just because if it's are you talking about from a governance standpoint in STM, and then the fact that a interagency process is moving forward doesn't preclude the centers of excellence to produce knowledge that will be useful in the future. And I think it has to be a global environment in which we do this. So touching the right, and I think our government is really on track with collecting as much as possible. I know some of you are very well connected with Steph Earle and Jeff Detroit, who send their regrets, and they love to continue. Of course, Carmen Brading is new to our organization as well. She's here to interact with you, and she has tremendous international experience in terms of engagement. She comes from the FAA International organization. And so that type of experience is what we're building, and we think that that'll be an opportunity to, while governance is forming and moving forward, that this knowledge remains and the space remains viable for when it's ready to move out.
Hello, my name is Rodrigo Fermo. I'm an aerospace engineer, graduated here from Embry-Riddle, and I'm currently an MBA student.
All right, awesome.
And as commercial space exploration starts to grow, and there's a refocus on the commercial side for the space, I was wondering if, due to obviously the concerns of national security and the reasons why the regulation is currently in place or set up, if as commercial exploration and space operations continue to grow, if there is expected to be a refocus of regulation to separate concerns of national defense and of simply commercial operations. I'm a foreign student, and there's obviously serious ITAR regulations that basically seclude, non-U.S. nationals, and due to many national security concerns. But again, as the industry continues to grow and other countries start coming into the picture and competition starts to increase, to keep the U.S. Active and at the forefront, I was just wondering if there's supposed to be a reshift in focus and regulation to just separate those operations that are indeed a national security concern and those that become just a commercial competition with different nations in the world.
Great question. And I think you've identified the issue that is under discussion right now as a result of the launch of the National Space Council in October. So multiple agencies are getting together, threading through these issues and determining what the best way forward is. Now, one of the challenging things, and I know for this group as well as me to observe, is how that interagency process moves forward, because of course, multiple stakeholders getting in the room, as we talked about at the UN level, can be a challenging process that ultimately slows things down. So we're looking for ways to import agility in the next 12 months or so, but also trying to determine what are those long-term items that we want to address. So I can't offer you the solution. What I can offer you is the discussion is lively and underway at the highest levels in our government.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyone else? All right. Thank you so much for having me here today. I look forward to talking with you.